Have you achieved success and a high income, but still lack personal fulfillment and work-life balance? You're in the right place. Welcome to the Successful But Struggling podcast. Join us as Erin, Eunicia, Joanne, and Mim share transformative insights and practical strategies just for you. Discover real stories and lessons that will elevate your personal satisfaction, professional accomplishment, and financial empowerment.
Welcome to another episode of Successful But Struggling. Today, we're going to be reflecting on nuggets of wisdom that the four of us came back from a business conference that we attended together. I'm going to be sharing about who actually has things figured out. And then Eunice is going to share about money really is complicated. And then Joanne's going to have a twist on stress management. And Mim is going to share about having really tough conversations. I'd like to get started by reflecting on one of the world-class coaches. Ed Milet is a person who's been voted as the number one coach in the world by some audiences. And he basically shared during his talk at this conference, he's coached heads of state, professional athletes, people at the top of their game. And you know what Ed Milet shared with the audience? He said, nobody's got it figured out. When we talk about impostor syndrome and thinking, oh my gosh, what am I doing in this leadership position, owning a business? I don't know what the heck I'm doing. And it was really refreshing to me to recognize that those feelings are so widespread, even in people that we look up to. And I know for myself, when I was reading Michelle Obama's book, she was talking about how President Obama left his dirty laundry around their home. And I was like, oh my gosh, the president of the United States can be a little bit of a slob or messy. That's amazing. So that we can give ourselves some forgiveness.
Erin, I love the fact that you quoted the book, because the reality is that when it comes to giving ourselves grace, we have to give ourselves grace. We have to give ourselves grace every single day. And the individuals, what I'm seeing is that the individuals that don't learn how to do that, and I'm sure that Joanne can talk to us all about that from a mindset perspective, are impacted the most, or impacted the worst. They struggle the hardest, unfortunately. And we see that, at least on the financial side, all the time, because people want to have it all figured out, but there's just no way to do that.
Yes, and you might be thinking, how could that be true? I am supposed to have it all figured out. And that's sometimes part of what gets us struggling, even within our success, or what keeps us in overwhelm or even burnout, because we have this belief there's this magic formula. There's this place that I'm supposed to arrive where I have it all figured out. And our brain tends to do a lot of comparison. So you might be thinking, so and so that I see in social media or my colleague, they look like they have it all figured out. And I always say, you never know what happens behind closed doors. And what is it that your mind is looking for that you compare yourself to and then end up feeling that you're doing something wrong. So I just loved hearing this because rightly, sometimes we feel that there's just something wrong. And to hear these people say, yep, no one has it figured out. All the people I've interviewed, they're all not me, Ed Milet. That's what he said. What they all have in common is they don't have it figured out. And we were all, oh goodness gracious. So I hope you are listening to this message and take it to heart.
Yeah. Joanne, I have to jump in because I had you read my mind. It's the comparison thing. And we use comparison as our metric for, am I doing all right? And we have to get serious. If we're going to break ourselves of that, we have to get serious about establishing a different metric. And as a runner, did you PR? So that's your personal record. Did you do better than last time? So you're not comparing yourself to others. You're looking at your own growth and celebrating where you've come from. And then set your sights on your next goal. It's so comforting to know that nobody feels like they have it figured out.
Well, and I think too, recognizing our strengths. We all have strengths and we all have weaknesses, and our brains are trained to look at the negative. So it's always going to be trying to point out to us where our weaknesses are. And yet we can be intentional and we can be looking for where our successes are, where are our wins, where am I really smart, but we're not smart in all areas. And with that, I would love to pass it on to Eunicia about sharing about how complicated money is and how we can get over, just focusing on that complexity.
Money is very complicated, Aaron. And yes, it resonates with everything that we're discussing about. And the beautiful thing is that when we start thinking about how it weaves in and how the complexities of money weigh on us so heavily, day in and day out, um, it leads us to this place where a lot of people feel embarrassed and talking about that grace. They're not giving themselves the grace to say, listen, I am a very successful fill in the blank, right? We can start with business owners. We can start with physicians. We can start with earlier today, I was talking to an aerospace engineer. He heard about us on a podcast and he said, I need your help. And then almost half line embarrassed after we had a little bit of a conversation, he said, I just don't know how to even come to resonate or to rationale with the fact that I am not comfortable with my investments. And we're talking in this particular state about millions of dollars. And the question came, how do I handle this considering that I'm not comfortable with it, considering that I don't know it? And if we go back to what Ed said about most people don't have it figured out, let me just tell you, as you're listening to this, there are a lot of financial individuals that don't have it figured out. There are a lot of individuals that are focused on whatever it is that they're focused on, their lane of expertise. And everything else, we have to figure out, how do we rely on experts that can help show us the way, that can help us just even enable us to give ourselves that grace to say, I'm okay, resting in the assurance that I've got the support. You don't have to just leave it all to somebody else. We'll talk about that some other time. But the whole idea of rest in the fact that you have support. And if you don't have the support team, Joanne, I know you're going to talk to us about that. It's very important. And I'd love you ladies' perspective on what do you see when it comes to money is complicated.
You're preaching to the choir to me, and I'm sure that you might be listening saying, yes, money's complicated, just help me out. And that's, I know that's a lot of times a source of stress, of thinking, I've worked this hard, I'm doing fine financially, what do I do now to protect myself for the future? And worse, you might be thinking, am I doing the right thing? And then again, the mindset comes in of that belief, we're doing it back to what Erin was saying of, I'm supposed to have it all figured out. And I love the idea of, thank you, Onisia, of saying, and you don't have to have it all figured out yourself. You are not supposed to. That's why we have experts. And then the knowledge of, okay, I can have someone who can not just do it for us, but that can explain it and then can also guide you. So you're not there just thinking, well, I'm doing it wrong, or worse, get stuck in the fear of money is complicated. We have to change our thoughts. So think about it. Think, what are your thoughts related to money? And where do they come from? I go in my little mindset tangents, but that's so important. And I've, as I hear Onisia share so many good nuggets with us, I always think about it in, for you, of what are your stories and where do they came from, and to know, yeah, of course you do not have to have it all figured out, and ask for help. That's always a good reminder. Thank you.
Here's the other thing that I would say to that point. When it comes to your success, you should find comfort in the fact that there's a level of complexity and there's a level of complication to your finances. Because if there wasn't, that would mean that as you're listening to this, you probably would not find yourself in the successful, but you're struggling somehow camp, right? And so because we're talking about you are successful, you have found that success financially, money is only going to get more complicated. The beautiful thing is you can do You can take measures to make sure that you can cope with it, that you understand what's happening with it, and that you can be more of an informed consumer when it comes to you making decisions. And Mim, you were going to say something.
Well, I was going to say that once again, Joanne has been reading my mind or reading my diary or I don't know what, because Eunicia, that's what I thought about when you were talking. It was the mindset piece in terms of where it comes from, because I was raised in a family that was very much a keep a stiff upper lip, pull yourself up from your bootstraps, don't ask for help. You can figure it out on your own. And if you don't figure it out on your own, if you don't figure it out on your own, you're probably doing it wrong. And so I've come 180, and I completely believe, Eunicia, what you're talking about, which is turn to people who are there, and this is what they do. This is what they do with all of their time. Get that support with the experts, especially in this area. So I love hearing about this.
And I think too, as successful individuals, especially as a physician, we are so used to not asking for help. And I remember hearing a couple of weeks ago, ask for help before you need it, not when it's a crisis. And I've really adopted that over the last few years and leaned on experts, not trying to figure it all out. Yes, we want to know what's going on with our money. Don't go at it blindly, but work with an expert who can help you learn, and where you don't have to get a master's in money management on your own. You don't have time for that. You've got other things to be focused on.
And even if you did, that would still not be enough.
Right. Yeah. With that, Joanne, I know you've got a twist on stress management, and I know for many people, money can be stressful. But what would you like to share with your takeaway about stress?
Yes, thank you, Erin. And the topic of stress management is such a big topic. So you might be asking, yes, tell me, you're a psychiatrist, you're a coach, how do you deal with stress? And what I am going to do is actually give you a twist on how to approach the thought of stress management as well. So there are so many tools that we can talk about to deal with stress. But I'm going to give it to you in how I heard it in this conference, that I thought this is so good to share because it's a twist and we don't always think about it this way. And so the first one is, when stress comes, can you deal with it? That's a lot of the information that we hear about stress management. And for you to know, how do you react? What's your formula in what's that common emotion that you have when you deal with stress? What are some of the thoughts that get stuck in your head? And most of us have some tools there. And it's important to know to have that ahead of time. Then the other kind of people is the people who stress comes and they're like, yes, that's a challenge. Let's go. And are you there? And to be honest, I'm sometimes conflict averse. So I rather be the one who just deals with it when it comes. But I have those tools there. So think of maybe where you fall, and what are some of those tools. And how do you feel when stress comes? Are you someone who gets super anxious and hides? Or are you someone who's super reactive and impulsive? Or are you this kind of person who just says, yes, bring it on, let me ask for help, I got tools, and you almost get energized by it? And then this is the kicker. This is the one I love that I really, really wanted to share with you. The third one is create the stress. And you might be thinking, what? Who wants to create the stress? And I work with a lot of women physicians, and we're experts at creating stress. But it's not just that, it's the intentional stress that and maybe stress is not the best word, but it's intentionally seeking challenge for growth. You know ahead of time that you're going to feel anxious about it, and at the same time excited, and know this is what I need to do to stretch, to grow, and to step into that identity. And the example that came to mind was, I was recently in a retreat I hosted for women physicians, and this one of the attendants, she's a dentist, she said, I am so proud that I am here with you, Joanne, because this is a stretch. And I was super anxious. I didn't want to come. And now that I'm here and I'm loving it, it's amazing. And then I shared, this is actually for me as well. I shared the little secret that I was so horribly anxious about the retreat and that I changed the dates multiple times because I didn't feel ready. And I realized this is fear holding me back. I need to create this thing that's making me anxious to grow, to stretch. And it ended up being beautiful for all of us. And now I can say, I can step into that identity. It's not just an idea. I've done it. So think about it for you. What is maybe that thing that's outside your comfort zone that you can intentionally create on purpose to stretch, to get to your next level, to grow, to step into that new identity? I really wanted to share this with you because such a different way to think about stress. We're always thinking of how to tone it down, how to make it go away. And that's not always the best way. It's if we think about bones grow and get stronger with stress. So some level of stress is actually really good. And I would love to hear you guys examples. I know that if we're here and we've made it far, you also have examples, and I would love to hear from our other hosts of their what comes to mind when you hear me say this.
I would love to share. I'm going to go back to Ed Milet's talk that stood out so much to me. And when he was talking about most people don't have it figured out, he shared this story about being in the shallow end of a pool with floaties on your arms. That's a really safe place to be, right? You're making sure you're not going to drown. You're making sure you're playing it safe. And yet, when we stretch ourselves and we get into the deep end, where maybe we're in a place we haven't been before, that's where the magic happens. And we go beyond that ceiling that we placed for ourselves, and we recognize, oh my gosh, I can swim. I don't need the floaties. I don't need to stay in the shallow end. I can do the big things, just like you saw. You could do this retreat, and you prove to yourself you can swim in the deep end. And it's just such a powerful way to grow.
As you're talking about that, Aaron, between you and Joanne, one thing that came to mind was the difference between the individual that's already the successful business owner, right? Whether we're talking about a physician that owns a practice, a dentist that owns a dental practice, or frankly, an attorney that owns a CPA practice, or somebody that's on the corporate side, right? They're high income individual. There's a little bit of a difference. And as you're listening to this, I would love for you to think about what is that thing that could make you feel uncomfortable, but not uncomfortable to the point where you want to run the other way, but uncomfortable to the point where it might be a stress, but you know that decision that you're about to make, it's also going to bring you so much joy on the other end. Similarly to you, Joanne, I have to make a really big decision, and I can't help it, but out of the corner of my eye, I started seeing a lot of emails popping up, and I looked and I was like, oh my gosh, the email I was waiting for, it's right there. And guess what? When I'm thinking about it, it makes my heart both sing for joy, but it also scares me to pieces because it's a totally new level that I've dreamt of for years. And when I finally heard about it, I said, this is the right time. So as you're listening, listen to your feelings, listen to your thoughts, and figure out what is that one thing that if you just took a little action on, we'll hear from him in a minute. Maybe it's leadership. Maybe you have to give a bad news to someone. How do you handle that? How do you handle your finances? How do you know what's your stressor points or what your trigger points are? The moment you have that figured out, you can all work on it, and then you can continue to the next level.
Joanne, this is such an important topic, and I really believe that the heart of all of this is our grappling with what our, not to get too existential on us, but what our philosophy of life is, and that what we are wired to do. And if we are wired to sit around, that's one thing. And then I would say this probably isn't the right conversation, but to understand that we really are we're wired to grow. This is what living things do. Living things grow. And that the floaties, what a great metaphor, Aaron, and the idea that growth does not happen in the comfort zone. And it does require some stress, like you say, Joanne. We even know this in physics, that with bones, they get stronger with some stress. Too much stress, it's too much, but too little stress. And something actually, it costs us if we're not in that stretch zone, not overly stressed, but that stretch zone.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of stress and stretching ourselves, ma'am, you're going to be sharing your nuggets about the sharing of tough messages. And I don't know that anybody's always excited. Oh my gosh, I have a really tough conversation to have right now. And yet it is so common for us to do that. And how can we kind of take that to the next level?
Mm, it's such a good question, Aaron. And of course, what came to mind for me was your story about Michelle Obama, thinking, okay, the president's dirty clothes are all over the bedroom and I can't take it anymore. And so, how am I going to give that feedback? How am I going to give that tough message that, honey, this does not work for me anymore? And we do have to give tough messages or tough feedback in a variety of situations. If you're going to have a relationship, that is worth anything, there will be tough messages because even very aligned people who are very similar and aligned in their thinking, there are going to be differences. There are going to be differences of opinion. There's going to be things that someone does that someone else takes exception to. This happens at home, this happens at work, and stuffing it always is not a great recipe for a strong relationship or for a healthy person. For you, stuffing those thoughts, those feelings. Of course, we got to pick our battles sometimes, but again, whether it's at home or whether it's at work, giving feedback is a really important part of our expertise, our success, and of course our relationships. And just as you said, Aaron, people don't like to give feedback. People don't run towards feedback. This is one of the big reasons that clients come to me and say, I'm in this leadership position, or I've got this stress going on at home. How do I say this thing without getting shut down? How do I say this tough thing at work without losing my top player? I have to give this feedback to my top performer. They could take their talents elsewhere, so I don't want to turn them off. And so how do I do it? I was so surprised recently. I worked with a leadership team, and one of the people said to me, I love this line. One of the people said to me, I'm a feedback ninja. And I said, you're a feedback ninja? And they said, I love giving feedback. And I will tell you, I have never heard anyone say that in my entire life. And as I worked with this person and with the larger team, I found out over the course of some days exactly what they were talking about. This team loved this particular person who's the feedback ninja. And it became very clear that this person was doing everything right. And so, what does that mean? What does that mean, doing everything right? Well, one of the things that we heard in the conference that we were at recently was that you have to make the feedback about them and not about you. It's what you say, it's how you say it, and then it's really, don't give them your message about what they're doing. Give them, or the feedback that you have to give them their story, give them their message, focus it around them. And what even does that mean? But that's the theory. But the actuality is, I would always include sharing with them your awareness of their goal, because what people are interested in is they're interested in their values, they're interested in their goals. And if you can kick off a tough conversation by keying into a goal of theirs, by keying into a value of theirs, something that it's I know that such and such, that I know that you're working really hard towards such and such, or that such and such is really important to you, or that if it's at home, you're going to say, I know you're working really hard to balance home and work and all the responsibilities. And so that just identification with what's important to them. And then some empathy. You're working hard to do this. You're trying hard to do this. Some empathy. It goes a long way when we see people. So that's a huge piece to include. And another huge piece is your intention. Your intention is to, like a doctor, help and not to harm. Your intention is to support and grow together, if that's a home piece, or if it's you're giving feedback to a direct report at work. It's my intention is to really help you to go as far as you want to go. So really just supporting their goals. Of course, you give the feedback itself, but when it's couched in your awareness of them and their context and their values and their goals, and you make sure they know that your intentions are right on, it can become gold. It can become gold. So a tough situation that you can turn into something that is ultimately a very productive conversation that ensues from that. But by productive conversation, I mean pro- healthy conversation where they get to be heard. Maybe they need to vent a little bit and then settle down into, if they have initial defensiveness, which oftentimes happens, but then they get that out, and then you have a really productive conversation that has a strong outcome and then has results at the end. Just some changes, some positive changes as a result of that. So I know that we have people on this, and by people I mean you, Joanne, and Aaron, and Unicia have all been bosses or are currently leaders of other people. You also have your human beings and have people in life you've needed to give the tough messages to. So what are your thoughts on that? How did that really hit you at the conference? That content around tough messaging.
Mim, I'm going to jump in because I think you're right. I think your brain and my brain are connected today because my brain has been spinning, hearing you with so many things that I want to share and you to have you hear about it. And it's actually some tangents, but I'm going to go with the tangent of when sometimes when I'm talking to someone, whether it's in my office, I'm talking to a patient or I'm talking with a client, a coaching client, we talk a lot about difficult conversations. So you might be thinking, yes, give right, like what else can we do for difficult conversations? We all have them. And one thing I say, this is a little tangent from what you were saying, Mim, is release the outcome. Because a lot of times we approach difficult conversations with a very specific outcome, and we can't control how the other person is going to react or think. And I say, then instead, think of how you want to make them feel. And it might sound a little cheesy, I know, as a psychiatrist, but this is in alignment with what Mim is telling you of know that intention of how you want them to feel. And that will create a good outcome for it, whether it's two people talking or you're talking to a team or you're giving a presentation. So it translates into so many different settings. So that was the thing that came to mind. And then the other thing was that we hear so much about the golden rule of treat others as you want to be treated. But what I heard you say was the what we hear is the platinum rule of treat others how they want to be treated. And again, these are tangents from what Mim is saying, but this is something that can help you as you're approaching it. It could be with your kid, with your spouse, at work, with your patients, with your clients. So again, a little tangent, and I'll pause here because I can go on and on this topic.
I wanted to say something about not just bringing intention to tough conversations, but bringing reps. So, some of the other topics we talked about is when we start a new thing, we haven't put in the reps, the repetition of doing it. When we get used to having ongoing regular conversations with someone that we're going to be interacting with, maybe someone we supervise or we work with, having regular conversations, not just when it's time for an annual review or if something happened. So we're taking away that if every time you talk to them, they feel like they're being brought to the principal's office, that never feels good. But what if we could normalize that you just have conversations? And sometimes they're more casual conversations, and other times they're the tough conversations. And not only by having ongoing communication with this person, so you learn their style, you learn what they need, as Mem shared, but also then we can practice having those conversations before they even occur. That extreme intention, if you know you're going to have a tough conversation, is number one, have it in your mind, have it with another leader, have it with a trusted individual, and bounce some ideas so that You're not having that conversation the first time in that moment. You've already had it at least once, if not several times. And then another key point that I've heard shared by one of my coaches and mentors is, what's the worst thing that could happen during that tough conversation? And be prepared for that. And that way, talk about intention. You are coming in well prepared, and they are going to know that you're well prepared by thinking all those things through.
Oh my gosh, Erin, that is I love the way that you married what Joanne and Mim said earlier. I love the platinum rule, by the way. I wrote it down. This is really cool. So think about this: the platinum rule plus have the reps. And before you guys jumped in, what was going through my mind was when you work on yourself to the point where you can truly be present for the other person. We practice that all the time with our clients. What we notice is that their guard goes down because nobody does that. Everybody wants to hear themselves. Everybody's all about, let me make sure that my point gets in there. And the other individual, as adversarial as one may be, think of maybe who's the most adversarial person you might have spoken to. If you would have taken the approach, or if you were to take that approach with that individual, to just listen and to follow the platinum rule, right? Put yourself in their shoes. How do they see themselves? How do they think about themselves? It makes a world of difference when it comes to how they respond back. And they will notice. Maybe they won't notice the first time, but they'll notice it the second time you do it, or the third time you do it. And what's going to happen is you're automatically, individually, and together, we can then spread the awareness so that people know that when you work on yourself, which was the whole topic of the business conference, when you work on yourself, when you work on those things that are triggering you and whatnot, you're actually impacting everybody else around you. So this was so powerful. Are there any other words that we want to share with our listener before we go in and conclude for the day? All right. Well, if there are not, let me repeat what we learned and what we discussed in this episode. Nobody has it all figured out. So as you're listening to this and you're thinking, oh my gosh, I've got all these questions that are still swirling in my mind. If you have questions, go to our website. One of us would be more than happy to talk to you about the specific topic that is weighing heavily on you. Thankfully, we have a lot of expertise between the four of us, so guaranteed we can cover it in one of those topics. Money is complicated. Speaking of, please, whether it's money or psychology or leadership, or you're wanting to figure out how to be more efficient, lean on the experts. Don't try to do it on your own. It's not pretty, and it's probably not going to happen. And if it did, would you want it to take years and years and years to get something that could have been addressed in maybe just a day or two or a week of work? The choice is yours. Then we talked about a twist on stress management. Think about this. What is it that's maybe stressing you out really badly, or that you would want to accomplish or achieve? And how could you put a twist on figuring out, make it a game? Stretch yourself by getting into the deep end of the pool and leave the floaties behind. Don't forget that one. Ed Milet loves it. Stuffing your feelings does not make for great relationships. Mim, you said that earlier, and I couldn't help but think about all the times when, again, we lean in and maybe we are part of a conversation versus figuring out how do we show up by focusing on the other people, on the other individual's goals. I like to call that put yourself in the other person's shoes. And when we do that, when we follow all of those things, some beautiful, beautiful things are happening. So without further ado, we want your feedback. So we want you to go ahead and make sure you listen to the next episode and let us know what are other topics that you might want us to talk about. That would make for a great conversation, a great way for us to get introduced. So go on our website, book that call. But before you do that, don't forget to listen to the next episode and share your feedback with us.
Don't miss out on more strategies that will elevate you to new heights. Visit successfulbutstruggling.com now, where you'll discover exclusive resources and the opportunity to connect with each of us individually. There you can dive deeper into how you, too, can take your personal and professional game to the next level. And if you're serious about optimizing your results, take 2 quick steps now. Number 1, connect with us on the website. And number 2, tune in to the next episode.